for York Universe, a co-production of the Observatory of York University, Toronto, and the Voice of Astronomy. AFM Radio, AFM Radio, AFM Radio, AFM Radio.
Hello and welcome to York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics program written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. I'll be one of your hosts this evening. I'm Dr. Elena Hyde, and I'm joined tonight by Quentin Wayrich, who may remember him from previous York Universe episodes. We are broadcasting live from the Allan Carswell Observatory located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This is, in fact, Science Night in Canada, where the lineup is all Canadian, starting with ourselves, York Universe, then on to Western Worlds, Quirks and Quarks, and Science for the People. Just as a little note, our program, York Universe, broadcasts every Monday night at 9 p.m. local Toronto time, but not on holidays, as you might have noticed last week. The York Universe production works in concert with our online public viewing program run by the Observatory team, which runs between the hours of 9 to 10 p.m. local Toronto time. That's right, it's live. So you can go over, if you're listening live, to yorku.ca/science/observatory and follow the links to OPV online public viewing, or click on any of the links on that page that say YouTube. You can also go there to YouTube directly and search for York University Allan Carswell Observatory. Our broadcast is powered by and in partnership with Astronomy.fm, the voice of astronomy. If you have any questions or comments from our past shows or suggestions for future topics, you can always email us at observe@yorku.ca. And of course, if you're on the social media, you can connect with us on Twitter at York Observatory, on Instagram at York U Observatory, and Facebook at Allan Carswell OMS. All of our programs are free, but if you'd like to make a donation, you can always see that website I mentioned before, yorku.ca/science/observatory. We will be monitoring the chat room on YouTube, or our crew will be monitoring the chat room on YouTube for any questions and to post content. The current weather is not so great. It's supposed to be clearing, but I don't know if they will be able to open up the telescope for you to show you live images on YouTube. They might be showing some awesome stock footage. Either case, it'll be fun over there. But yeah, this crazy summer weather in Toronto is not doing us any favors at the observatory. I think there was rain coming in this morning, which I could see on our all sky cam, and then it got really hot, and now it's just kind of hazy. Very, very odd weather around the York University. How's the weather up where you are, Quentin?
Well, right now it's pretty foggy. This morning it was really hazy. It was because of the wildfires. The forest fires that are happening up north. It's blowing smoke in. My friend, who lives about 40 minutes away from me, was saying that they could smell smoke in the air. So really not ideal conditions. I would honestly be surprised if it clears up later.
Yeah, I would be as well. It is, of course, very unfortunate when you get smoky, hazy weather, because then that really gets in there and sticks to your telescope optics. It's also very bad for your lungs. So, if you've got those masks around, even more reason to wear them, I suppose. And, of course, if you're outside looking, you might notice some strange things up in the sky. The smoke in the atmosphere can make things look a bit red. So if you're watching the sunset or looking at the nearly full moon later tonight, it might have a bit of a reddish tinge. And don't worry, it's not a UFO. It's probably just smoke in the upper atmosphere, making it get that bit of a reddish tinge as the light tries to travel down to us. We'll talk more about the UFO links to the broadcast later. But as I mentioned, it can even make some planets, which are normally sort of bright or whitish color, appear a bit redder. And if you have a red object like Jupiter or Mars, it will be even extra red tonight. So I suppose if it does clear, it's something you can all look out for. All right, so moving up and out, We talked about Jupiter and Mars and what you can see. How about taking us to something that we definitely can't see, Quentin? We'll go ahead and do some This Week in Space and Astronomy history, and let you start us off out at the icy edge of the solar system.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, speaking of something that we definitely can't see, how about we talk about one of the most distant man-made objects in existence? That is, of course, Voyager 2. June 5th, 1989, 34 years ago today, Voyager 2 began regular observations of Neptune. So the project that would eventually become the Voyager program arose when astronomers realized that a periodic alignment of the four gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, would occur in the late 1970s. And that could allow a simple probe to fly by all four planets using the technique of gravity assists. The project changed in its scope a few times over the course of its development, but the final plan for the Voyager program was that it would consist of two probes, Voyager 1 and 2, which are now absolutely famous. Voyager 1 would explore Jupiter and Saturn, as well as Saturn's moon, Titan. Voyager 2 would also explore Jupiter and Saturn, and then would either have the option to continue on to Uranus and Neptune, or be redirected back to Titan as a backup for Voyager 1. So the two spacecraft were identical in design. Each carried a host of scientific instruments, including invisible band cameras, radio telecommunication systems that could also be used to probe the planets in radio and study their structure, UV and infrared spectrometers, a plasma spectrometer, a magnetometer, and equipment for studying interstellar cosmic rays. They also each carried a copy of the famous Golden Record, which carries pictures, sounds, and graphical information about Earth as a sort of time capsule and message to any alien civilizations that might someday encounter the probes. Voyager 2 was actually launched first on October 20th, 1977, with its sibling launching on September 5th of the same year. However, Voyager 1 was launched on a shorter and faster trajectory, which was planned to allow it to pass close to Titan. Titan is the only moon in the solar system with a dense atmosphere. Voyager 1 completed its flyby of Titan as planned on November 12, 1980, which launched it out of the ecliptic plane of the solar system and on a trajectory bound for interstellar space. It officially reached interstellar space in 2012. Because Voyager 1's mission to Titan was a success, Voyager 2 was free to continue on to the other gas giants past Saturn. It made its closest approach to Uranus on January 24th, 1986, and after exiting the Uranian system, it took over 3 years before it encountered Neptune. The Neptune observation phase began on June 5th, 1989, as mentioned, with the probe making its closest approach on August 25th. After exiting the Neptunian system on October 2nd, Voyager 2 began its own journey into interstellar space, and it crossed the heliopause and officially exited the solar system in 2018. To this day, Voyager 2 is the only space probe to have explored Uranus or Neptune, although that may change eventually. Let's hope.
Absolutely, fingers and toes crossed for that.
Yeah, there's lots of really interesting things that we still have to learn about those planets. So my understanding is that there are some plans in the works. I look forward to seeing what happens.
Yeah, and of course with the JWST, we are able to see a little bit more than we would have ordinarily, which we might have time to talk about later on this evening. But at these incredible distances, you really, really do need an orbiter. And of course, Voyager 1 and 2 doing amazing work. And now I think even at the speed of light, it's something like 21, 24 hours to talk to either one of them. They're so incredibly far away. It is, it is well and truly past the time that we sent something back to Neptune and of course Uranus, because all of these amazing, interesting, icy moons and action out there, and we just don't even know what might be happening. So. Keeping our UFO hopes up, I suppose.
Yeah. Always gotta keep your hopes up.
Exactly. Well, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you don't let it interfere with your scientific analysis.
Right.
Which historically has been an interesting problem. So Neptune is actually interesting as well because Voyager 1 and 2, of course, having tragically the only flybys, Neptune was known for quite a while before these flybys happened, but it was not one of the sort of ancient planets of history. It doesn't go back tens of thousands of years like our observations of Jupiter and Mars. It's so far away that it had to be predicted mathematically before it was observed. And when it was observed directly for the first time in 1846, they knew what they were looking for. And it is interesting because, of course, being a more recent discovery, if they hadn't have predicted Neptune, but had just observed it moving around with respect to the background stars, Neptune itself actually would have classified as a UFO. Because, of course,
predict it based on. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah.
They were able to predict it based on the orbital irregularities of Uranus, right?
Yeah, and it was a confirmation of the Newtonian gravitational theory and this idea that the laws of gravity on Earth could be applied to quote unquote the heavens or things outside of Earth up in space. And of course, Neptune and its moon Triton were really, really interesting. And when they were first discovered, it started a whole boom, people thinking what might still be out there. And they were looking with their 1800s style telescopes. And there's not a lot out there that's the same size as Neptune. So they did have some trouble. They made some interesting discoveries. So, and of course, Triton being another one of the critically underexplored objects of our solar system. Its retrograde orbit, possibly a dwarf planet that was captured, just so many interesting things out there. So being familiar with the unknown and that chance for discovery, I don't know. I think it's a pretty good reason to go back to Neptune. Anyhow.
Absolutely.
So you might guess that there's a little bit of a theme with this episode. So I'm actually going to take us to 1947, which is a little bit before this mission, because I want to bring in a little bit of an unusual this week in space and astronomy history. So I'm not following the rules strictly because I want to go to 1947. June and early July of 1947 in particular. And this was an interesting time in space history and just generally an interesting time for looking up because in 1947, this is kind of the advent of what we consider the modern UFO or unidentified flying object, as everyone who's seen the X-Files knows. So in 1947, there was a surge of sightings in June and early July. And on July 9th, 1947, that finally got to the point where they're like, okay, we have to do something. And one of the first reports of North America was started off in the US, and it was called Project Sign, to investigate what was going on with these sort of unidentified flying object reports. Of course, unidentified flying objects could mean just different kinds of aircraft, but this was the first time they started to make that sort of more of a, it could be extraterrestrial, maybe question mark. And it didn't come out of nowhere. So their first couple reports were actually out of Scandinavia and Europe. In Sweden, you had an entrepreneur who famously made his claim to fame for his company was actually that he said in 1946 that he had found a flying saucer. So it was got very, very, very popular. And the unidentified flying object report that they came out with at the time, it actually had, sort of was the first of its time, but they were able to explain a lot of the sightings as aircraft, of course. And the actual Project Sign wrapped up in, I believe, later on in 1949. So that's about 2 years later. So the quote from them was that while most of the UFOs that they were getting reported were actual aircraft, there wasn't enough data to determine the origin. And so, of course, this led to all kinds of interesting things. Could it be weather balloons? Could it be spy satellites? There were a lot of things happening in the 1940s. But this initial report did not really do a huge amount to dispel the rumors that had built up. And of course, the Project Sign report of the 1940s was really just the start. So what I mean by the start of our modern UFO sightings is that specifically the idea of flying saucers and little green men. But it's worth noting that in this program and several other times around, in astronomy, we have talked about unidentified celestial objects, strange things in the sky that have been documented by people around the world. One of the really famous ones, of course, are comets. Comets were portents of doom, signs from the gods. They were UFOs, actually, for a long time because people did not know what they were. And because they were largely unpredictable, having a comet fly by, a really unusual event, people didn't know what to think about it, and so they attributed it to all kinds of different objects. And comets were not the only kind of strange things that you could see in the sky. Of course, we have bolide meteorites, which make up a great light show, as we saw last year in Toronto as well. And of course, you have the human imagination, which is a wonderful, wonderful tool, but does go a bit far sometimes. So in this particular UFO report of the 1940s, and I say 1940s, it's worth remembering that for thousands of years, people have been telling themselves stories about unexplained phenomenon from the sky, from everything from meteorites to comets, and even our moon. And this is where I just want to remind our listeners, if you haven't heard of it before, the Great Moon Hoax of 1835. And this is well before the UFO phenomenon as we know it. Was fabulously successful, for some value of fabulous, because it actually got a huge number of people to buy into the idea that there were living creatures on the moon. And 1835, we had telescopes enough to see a reasonable amount of detail on the moon. So it should have been a little bit obvious that this was not the case, but people said, oh well, they're in the shadows, they're in the craters, or but it was a very, very detailed hoax article published in The Sun, a New York newspaper from the United States. And it was a series of articles supposedly attributed to Sir John Herschel, who I do not believe is on record as having appreciated his name being attached to it. But it described in great detail bison and goats and unicorns and beavers. And we've talked about this one before because it was just very, very, very detailed, and it was written up in an actual newspaper. And so people were like, well, I guess, I mean, if that's what the scientists say, and they read it, and it got a surprising amount of traction before, of course, people realized that it was a hoax and they had to print retractions. But completely captured the imagination. And that's something that has always been the case throughout history. So it's an interesting crossover between, of course, our stories as humans that we like to tell ourselves and each other, but also how that kind of background inspired the the sort of first modern UFO sightings, and the surge of aircraft and rocketry that was happening, early rocketry, I guess, in the 1947, probably did not help the UFO sightings that were on the uptick. that they're And of course, the project signed final report saying that yes, some of these are just actually aircraft. And it was not strictly the U.S. government doing that study. So unlike other studies that we'll talk about later, this was actually the United States Air Force, or USAF, and it was a precursor to what we have seen recently in terms of Canada and the US looking to find better ways to collect data about things that we're not able to identify, which is one of the things that has been problematic throughout history, if I don't say so myself. But it is an interesting report. So if you're interested in Project Sign, there's a whole series of reports that were kind of done around this time. And one of the interesting conclusions is that UFO reports could be used to potentially induce panic in a population. And so explaining that these were, in most cases, just actual aircraft and how actual aircraft could look, did help a little bit. I'm not sure how much. But it is pretty interesting little bit of history. So it's This Week in Space and Astronomy History, sort of this week, and going back to 1947. So gets us in the mood to hear about things that go up and things in the atmosphere. So one of the things, of course, that was happening in the US in particular, and in North America, was the advancement of aircraft and rocketry to be able to get things off of the ground, which I think gets us kind of towards what your next article is, Quentin.
Yeah, this next item, unfortunately, it's a little bit more tragic. It's kind of tragic, but it's something that I always think about around this time of year. It really is. You were talking a lot about how, with all these early reports of UFOs, it really captures the public imagination. I think even before we had the concept of the UFO, space and all of the phenomena that we can see in the sky captured our imagination as a species. And I think human history will show us that there is a lot that we are willing to do and a lot that we're willing to sacrifice in order to find out what is, beyond the next horizon. So I did kind of want to talk about something like that. So tomorrow, June 6th, marks the 52nd anniversary of the fateful launch of Soyuz 11. That occurred on June 6th, 1971. So this was a Soviet mission. It was the only crewed mission to enter the first space station, Salyut 1. Salyut 1 was itself launched on April 19th of 1971. And Soyuz 10, which launched on April 22nd, had attempted to do the same thing that Soyuz 11 did. It was attempting to dock onto Salyut 1 and allow its three-person crew to board. But it failed to dock correctly, and the cosmonauts had to return home without entering the station. So the Soyuz 11 crew consisted of three cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev, who successfully docked with Salyut 1 on June 7th and remained aboard the space station for 22 days. The three loaded Salyut's scientific equipment back onto the Soyuz capsule and undocked on June 29th. The work compartment of the capsule was jettisoned prior to re-entry, causing radio communications to be interrupted unexpectedly. The craft's automatic landing systems brought it back down to Earth in Kazakhstan shortly before midnight on June 29th, and the landing appeared normal from the outside. However, when the capsule was opened, the recovery team were horrified to discover that all three men had tragically died. It turned out that when the orbital module and the descent module had separated from each other, the explosive bolts that had been holding them together all fired at once rather than one at a time as planned. So the increased explosive force caused a seal on the pressure equalization valve to loosen, opening the valve and depressurizing the cabin. While the position of Patsayev's body within the cabin suggests he may have attempted to close or block the valve, he was not able to do so before losing consciousness. The three cosmonauts died of asphyxiation in under 40 seconds at an altitude of 168 kilometers, which is above the Kármán line. Dobrovolsky, Volkov, and Patsayev were neither the first nor the last in the list of nearly 200 people who ended up losing their lives in spaceflight-related incidents. But to this day, they remain the only three human beings to die in space. Whenever I am reminded of this story, it leaves me feeling very existential, I guess. The feeling that all throughout our history, every human being has been born on Earth and has died on Earth, with the exception of these three people. But every astronaut that dons the spacesuit, that gets ready to go on a mission, understands in the back of their mind that there is a chance that something like this could happen and that they may not make it back down. And many of them did not make it back down. But they still are willing to go into the unknown, because that's what we do as humans. And there's something very inspiring about that, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's something to remember is when we're thinking about, the wonder of the unknown, it's so much more interesting to be inspired by what's really there, because actual space is more extreme and more mysterious than anything you could write in fiction. When I say like stranger than fiction, it really is. And
it really is.
It really, really is. And the people who have lost their lives in our attempts to try to explore it, it really deserves respect. And I think that's one of the things that, of course, as scientists, we want to see that continue, and the real respect for the people who have made these amazing things happen. And it's when you do have things you don't see, or things that are unexpected, a lot of times that can help you to pin down potential problems, whether it's in your rocket or your scientific process. It's just, in this case, it's very, very, very much too bad that they couldn't have figured this out before launching, of course. Afterwards, I'm assuming that there were substantial changes made. But it is all part of that.
I do know that the Soyuz
space. Yeah.
I do know that the Soyuz capsules remained in use for decades. I don't know if they're still in use, but it was like at least until it was like at least until 2019. I guess they are still continuing to use them.
Yes.
Yeah. That really does show. Like, obviously they needed to make improvements to this particular design, but there is a lot that is still very valuable about those old machines.
Yeah, and Soyuz has been one of the workhorses of space exploration. It's over I think nearing 2,000 flights or so since 1966. So they're really quite they're quite the thing, the Soyuz rockets. And of course
that's incredible.
And of course, back in the 1940s, we had the early V2 rockets happening in Germany, which was maybe contributing a little bit to that that UFO thing we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's see if we can round off our This Week in Space and Astronomy history. I think I have time for one more here. So I'm going to take us back to looking at unidentified aerial phenomena now. So I'm taking us away from UFOs and I'm taking us to UAPs. Because in June of 2021, not too long ago, we have sort of the precursor to one of our main news items, which is that we had an initial sort of start to a UFO report, or UAP report, I should say. So this report was based off of the U.S., but also applies to Canada, and this was the start of preparing and publishing information about unidentified aerial phenomenon. And it was supposed to give sort of a detailed analysis of aerial phenomena data and intelligence. Obviously, they're not going to actually share with us, the military secrets involved. But, in after this was released in 2021, a huge amount of interest from the public came up with UFOs. And he's like, hey, is this something that we can actually report on now? Is this something that potentially, we could, if I found something, could I submit it on an app? How is it going to work? But the initial report on the UAPs found that we don't have the ability to identify things at an accurate enough level in a lot of the data. And some unusual movement patterns or flight characteristics could be breakthrough technology. Some could be problems with your video gathering technology. And there were no links reported to any extraterrestrial life. But it did start, as I say, a lot of interest in UFO sightings. And of course, recent sightings have been everything from balloons to interesting military aircraft, and I think just recently, we have seen military aircraft shoot down quote unquote meteorology balloons that have wandered into the wrong territory in Canada as well. So it's something that has been on our recent history as well as ancient history, and now we call them UAPs instead of UFOs. And I think one of the defining characteristics is they're trying to expand it out a little bit so that it's sky, water, and space. So you could have unidentified anomalous phenomena in any area. And of course, one of the things that came up from this original report in 2021 was a special paragraph from the U.S., which was all about defense, really, which is basically saying, hey, we're very interested in tracking any kinds of incursions by balloons or vehicles or drones now. Actually, drones make wonderful UFOs, just so you know, because they can travel in very weird ways, and they have different colors and shapes. There's even a drone that looks like a lawnmower that flies around in the air. It's kind of cool if you haven't seen that one. But anyways, from the 2021 report, the in particular incursions for military training areas or designated airspaces really pose a safety for flight and security operations. And this actually goes for drones as well as any other thing that can fly. And the defense, most defense organizations would take these kinds of incursions pretty seriously from any aerial object. So some of those reports they'll share, some of them they won't. And in 2021, they really highlighted the challenges associated with assessing UAPs near or on defense training ranges and installations. Because, of course, if you find something that has made an incursion, you'll have to improve your processes, your policies, and your technologies, but you won't necessarily want to tell people how you've improved it because I suppose it's a state security secret, so we won't look into that anymore. But it is very, very interesting, of course. And in 2021, so not that long ago, understanding UAPs and trying to get better data collection on them was already really quite kind of one of the key areas, shall I say, of looking at UFOs and seeing, can we gather better data for these things? And with camera sizes now being small and substantially better, there are multiple chances of getting better information, potentially even synchronizing collection, or I don't know. So my own thought when I first read this article was to see if they had suggested anything like an app for citizen science, because of course we've seen in astronomy and in physics just how well things like Galaxy Zoo have done with their citizen science endeavors. I don't know if they'll do that, but that was the first thing I thought of when I read about it, of course. And it is also interesting that we have so many different kinds of flying technology now than we have ever had before. Because it's not just planes and rockets going up, it's not just balloons. We now have drones, we have actual working individual flying cars. I mean, granted, most of them are prototypes, but there's even jetpacks out there now that some people do actually have. So presumably, if somebody flew past with a jetpack, it would be a unidentified aerial phenomenon to me, because I don't know what that looks like. Um, but the real issues of UAPs are, is it something that's going to be a safety hazard? Is it something that might be going through restricted areas, or is it going to affect radar systems? Is it going to, collide with aircraft? Because that could be a problem as well. So back in 2021, they were already getting started with seriously looking at some of these issues, and I'll save the rest, I think, for the news article.
I find the timing of this a bit humorous, with them like starting to really look into the UAPs in 2021, and then there was the whole fiasco with the balloons earlier this year.
Yeah.
It seems that they picked a good time to start investing more resources into looking at them.
Yeah, well, no, in one case, I believe it was a hobby, like a school hobby group had their balloon destroyed. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
So, yes.
I guess maybe I'm getting the cause and effect backward. Maybe they only knew about all these balloons because they had done this in the first place.
That
Maybe
could well be true.
Yeah.
And radar systems have also gotten a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Well, a lot of schools all over the world have SEDs or student groups that launch balloons, weather balloons, as small satellites up in high altitude balloons, as part of small scientific studies. So it's I suppose it's not surprising that one got shot down, but they are starting to find them more, which is yeah, that it could be that the radar technology has gotten to the point where they're now starting to find a lot of these hobby balloons and other things that normally just wouldn't be detected.
Yeah, that makes more sense, honestly.
It's a good guess, anyways. All right, folks, I think it's about time that I remind everybody you are in fact listening to York Universe, broadcasting live from the Allan and Carswell Observatory, located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. If you're interested to join in live with the chat, you can head on over to yorku.ca/science/observatory, go on to our YouTube link, or click on anything that says OPV, and it will take you to the live YouTube broadcast with the same audio and some pictures from our wonderful observatory crew. You can chat with them. And tonight you're listening to Dr. Elena Hyde and Quentin Mayrich. We're talking about UAPs, UFOs, and all kinds of fun things in history. We're about to switch into the news. So let's go ahead and continue on. I do believe we have one announcement for anyone who's listening. As long as you're not listening to this as a really old recording, this week, this is June, on the 7th of June, 2023, we will be up on the Arboretum parking garage roof for a live in-person tour. So if you want to join in for a tour after sunset, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., we'll have all of our telescopes up on the roof of that parking garage, and you can hop in and have a look at the beautiful moon or anything else you want. If you want to get your ticket for that, it is free, but you do need to get an Eventbrite ticket. They're on that same website, yorq.ca/science/observatory. So your very own chance to look uppity, as they say. So just to inspire everyone about UFOs a little more, why have we been talking about UFOs this whole episode? Well, to give you a little bit of historical background and also to lead into our major news item for today, which is, of course, UAPs and UFOs, because it has been very, very recently, last week, sometime, a few days ago by my account, we had the first public meeting of the NASA UAP, or Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena, committee, and they have found that there are a bunch of interesting things we can take away. None of them are actual UFOs, like aliens. So they mention a lot of things in this report. So from NASA's public meeting, literally just days ago, we have a few hundred mysterious objects that have been reported, but only a really, really small fraction of them are actually anomalous. Things that were just like, I'm not sure if we understand that. So not aircraft or, drones dressed up to look like lawnmowers. Things that really are difficult to explain. So the Pentagon report from 2021 said that of 144 sightings by military pilots, all but one were explainable. And of the 50 to 100 odd reports that they get each month, only about 2% of them tend to be unexplainable. So this report got everybody really interested in UFOs again, of course, because they said UFOs in public, but they had a lot to say about this that was really, really interesting. So in addition to just pointing out a few things that optical illusions and our ability to perceive things can cause UFOs very, very easily. If you've ever seen a mirage, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's a famous one from Scott Kelly, a former astronaut, had an optical illusion that they really, really thought was a UFO, like it was completely unidentified. And they went back and looked at it. They flew around and came back, and it was a literal balloon. It was a Bart Simpson balloon. So they had it was like, yeah, that would be weird to come across that out of the corner of your eye flying in an airplane. And fortunately, they were able to circle back and go, oh, it's just a really weird balloon.
Would it be in bad taste for me to say, don't have a cowman?
Not at all. But that's what you want to do with your data. You want to go back and you want to check. And one of the problems with UAP and UFO reporting has been that there is a significant stigma attached to them. Commercial pilots are very, very reluctant to report sightings. And that was actually in this report, saying, hey, we actually need to remove the stigma about the data collection, because we want to collect high quality data. Who knows what kind of cool atmospheric phenomenons we might be missing out on just because we're not willing to collect good data. And that is actually something that was mentioned a few times in regards to this report, is the people who have been serving on it to compile recommendations were actually subject to harassment on social media, which is really unacceptable in any case. But how are we going to understand what's going on in the sky? Well, we want good data, and we want good verified data that we can analyze. More data gathering, robust analysis, collecting credible information, and people bringing in information were not considered credible. So how are we going to set up reporting so that the information is credible? And this is where, one of the important aspects of science, I think, can really, really help us, because when we have things we don't understand, things that are odd, that's when we find out about Cepheid variables or planets around other stars. Or even just in 2015, one of my own personal favorites, and not just because it's from Australia, in 2015, they were using radio telescopes and they found an odd signal, and they followed it up, and it led to the first ever real-time imaging of actual plasma tubes in Earth's ionosphere. That's right, in our own Earth's atmosphere. These awesome structures, these plasma tubes, or sometimes called Whistler ducts, which they actually found out later when they'd gone back to image them in more detail, found out they followed the Earth's magnetic field. It's really cool. And by the way, the person who made this study was actually an honors student who made all the rest of us in Australia look very bad. But huge congratulations to Cleo Loy, who was in charge of doing this observing. And if they had not followed this up with good and robust data, we would never have learned about this totally fascinating real structure that's in our atmosphere. And it's something that good data and robust data collection can really, really help with. So that's one of the main 5 aspects that they pointed to in this report. They also call for sort of a new era of transparency, showing people how we find what various different kinds of quote unquote UFOs are. How do we show an optical illusion? How do we show how, if it's a mirage or a Bart Simpson balloon or whatever it actually ends up being? Allowing people to report their oddities can bring in real information. And we're talking about, really, really recent history now, because of course this report just came out. But in 2020, there was actually a massive increase in UFO sightings during the pandemic. And people, oh, it's a pandemic. But actually, it was a real effect, because some of you might recall what was going on in 2020. Well, Starlink. Starlink had just kicked up in 2020. They were launching 60 satellites at once, creating these crazy UFO strings of lights without telling people what they were. And there was a lot more small flying objects, as well as unusual patterns of light moving strangely in the sky. Of course, there were lots of UFO sightings. Unfortunately, Starlink was, if not to the general public, at least to the scientific community, relatively transparent about what they were doing. But if it had been another company or someone else in the world, some other country launching 60 satellites at once, putting thousands of satellites into orbit, if we had been categorizing and processing our UFO sightings in a sensical and scientific way, we could have actually discovered that just by paying attention to the data. So it's interesting, and it is very, very current news. So it's not exactly little green aliens, but it does give a chance to let people really participate in looking at our atmosphere and looking at our planet together. And it comes into all kinds of things, everything from the amount of clutter taking up space in the atmosphere, plastic bags, balloons from, I think, balloons from those baby review. What's it called when they release a bunch of balloons for babies? Um, those kinds of things go flying through the air.
Gender reveals?
Yeah,
The colored balloons?
giant piles of balloons go flying through the air, plastic bags, all that kinds of stuff. So all of this actually could help us track pollution in the air. Who knows? It's something that we'll find out when we get better data. So that's the article at the time. You'll probably see it all over on BBC.com and CBC.ca. Both have nice articles about this UFO panel and their recommendations. And of course, they're going to keep on making recommendations. And fingers crossed, they make a nice citizen science app or something for us.
This is a great idea, honestly. Essentially, bringing this outward, like having the general public be involved in this effort. It's a really good idea. I didn't know about that, what you were talking about with the plasma tubes, though. That's the first I've heard of that. That's really interesting. I'll have to look that up.
Well, see, that's what I mean. You just never know what you're going to discover when you start examining interesting data signals. I mean, famously, Australia did also have another anomalous radio signal years and years earlier. I can't remember exactly the year, but it was literally from somebody's microwave. Like, it was just somebody's microwave that was really active because old microwaves. And they were trying to figure out what this crazy signal was, and it was just a microwave. So, but yes, I think we've got a few more minutes, so let's go ahead and round this off. We've talked a lot about UFO signals and UAP. So it's I'm never quite entirely sure, but I believe officially in Canada we're supposed to call them UAPs now. But all of these things are not alien life. So just to round off the show, I think that it would behoove us to maybe mention just a little bit about if we did want to find alien life, what might be an interesting way to go about and do that. And so what I'm going to do is just quickly remind everyone about the Miller-Urey experiment, which is a chemistry experiment carried out in 1952 that sort of simulated conditions thought to be present in the atmosphere of early Earth. So very, very, very unpleasant. Water, methane, ammonia, hydrogen, lightning, or electric arcs creating sparks would not have been habitable as we know it. But in these conditions, Miller and Urey, the Miller-Urey experiment, he started this in 1952, and he created this experimental setup and made a set of sealed vials from the original experiments. And after his death in 2007, they checked the sealed vials in 2007, mind you, and found 20 different amino acids, building blocks of life as we know it. So that's more than what Miller actually reported and more than the 20 that occur. So there was well over 20, and there was only 20 that naturally occur in our own genetic code. So this was entirely chemical. And this was sort of an end to a 53-year-old classic experiment on the origins of life. It was, discussed by Carl Sagan and I think the original Cosmos, if not just generally. but it was one of the most evocative experiments ever, and it did show huge promise for life in other places other than Earth. Because if you could recreate early Earth-like conditions with water and a few other chemicals and a little bit of electricity, injecting energy into the system, you could also create those amino acids, and maybe you could also evolve them into life. So I'll just take a second to remind everybody that in addition to UFO news, we have had a wonderful picture from the James Webb Space Telescope of a vast water vapor plume from Saturn's moon Enceladus, spanning more than 6,000 miles from Los Angeles to Buenos Aires, Argentina. So this is the first time such a large water emission has been seen, and there's a whole water torus going around Enceladus's orbit. But Enceladus is a watery ocean world, about 4% of the size of Earth. And it's a hugely exciting scientific target because it definitely has liquid water. It's literally spewing it out in geyser-like volcanoes into space. We can see it. You could literally just drive a spacecraft through and it would be covered in Enceladus water. So I suppose the towering plume of water escaping from Saturn's moon, that would be where I would look for if you really, really wanted to find life elsewhere in our own solar system. How about you, Quentin? Do you have a favorite spot?
Oh, that's tough. It seems like all the time we find that there are more moons in the solar system that have water. Like I remember when I was a kid, I read, oh, well, yeah, Europa probably has a subsurface ocean. And I was like, oh, that's incredible. There's a moon out there with a subsurface ocean. But it's not just Europa. Just in Jupiter alone, apparently it's Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto. Enceladus clearly has a subsurface ocean. And I think recently they discovered that four of Uranus's moons, Ariel, Umbriel, Titania, and Oberon, those probably also contain water oceans beneath their crusts. So we have all these moons that are likely to have subsurface water. I really hope that we're able to, at some point, like go to these moons, properly like take a sample of some of the water down there. Maybe we could find some kind of most likely quite simple, but some kind of alien life. Because what I'm hoping we could get is if one of those moons turns out to have life that is completely unrelated from Earth life, the insights we can gain into what life can be, what kind of conditions it can develop in, would greatly improve. And if we could, if we're fortunate enough to be able to somehow find more than one of these moons that has some kind of life within its ocean, then we could compare them to each other, and that's even more data. I think there's a lot that we could find, a lot that might surprise us about how different life could be from what it is on Earth, because everything that we see on Earth evolved under very specific conditions. But if we want to find life elsewhere in the cosmos, we need to understand. We need to have a better understanding of what we even should be looking for.
Absolutely. And of course, most people who've listened to this program know I'm a big fan of Mars, but there's so many interesting locations. And of course, getting out there and exploring them is the only way to know for sure. But having things that are literally just spewing water into space, it seems like a really good place to start. Of course, it's not the closest. And we do still have the terribly underexplored Uranus and Neptune and all of those moons. So it is a very, very exciting time to try to get out there more into the solar system. And as you say, go get into that water, get our toes wet. Or maybe not, but and I think it's about time to wrap up for tonight, so I hope we've given you all a lot of fun things to think about. It is about time to end off our program, so I'm going to tell everyone thank you for joining, and you have in fact been listening to York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics program, written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. The hosts this evening have been myself, Dr. Elena Hyde, and Quentin Wayrich, talking to you about UFOs, UAPs, and maybe even a little bit of life in the solar system. Stay tuned, because it is Astronomy Night in Canada. Coming up next is Quirks and Quarks, Western World, and Science for the People. You can always connect with us on Twitter at York Universe or York Observatory, Instagram with York U Observatory, and Facebook at Allan I. Carswell Obs. Check out our website for show notes, content, updates, and contact info at yorku.ca/science/observatory. Thanks for tuning in.